Damn it. I knew something was off from the very first look he gave me, a gaze that didn't see me as a human being. I'm Maya Bennett, the woman who once held an entire company together, until the boss's son kicked me out with just one cold sentence. But that was only the beginning of a twist he never saw coming. What would you do if, after 11 years of dedication, you were fired with a single cold sentence from a guy who never even read the contract you signed? I chose silence. No begging. No resistance. But it was that very silence that made him destroy everything himself. Do you think I handled it the right way? If you've ever been underestimated or disrespected, share your story with me in the comments. Don't leave, because this story isn't over yet. Behind the silence lies a quiet counterattack no one could have seen coming. Stay tuned for what happens next. I still remember that Monday morning like it was yesterday. The coffee machine in the company break room hummed its usual tune, dripping slowly into the pot. I added a splash of oat milk to my cup, mentally preparing for the upcoming meeting with our partners. In just a few days, the deal with Vanguard developers would be finalized, a deal I had spent nearly half a year building from the ground up. I didn't hear the footsteps, but when I looked up, he was already standing there, Logan Pierce, the only son of Mr. Harold, the founder of the company, and now the new CEO, having taken over less than a week ago. He didn't greet me. No smile, not even a polite nod. Just stood there, hands in his pockets, staring at me like I was some dusty old piece of furniture shoved into a corner. Then, with a voice dry and devoid of emotion, he said, "Maya, to my office. Now." I froze for a moment, not because of the words, but because of the way he said them. There was no respect, no hint of dialogue, just a command. I followed him to the 12th floor, to the newly renovated executive office, glass walls, oak desk, and the scent of fresh leather. I tried to stay calm, to keep my breathing steady, though my chest was starting to stir with unease. He didn't offer me a seat. Before I could ask anything, he said bluntly, "You're fired. Effective immediately." I stood still. I couldn't believe what I'd just heard. My vision blurred for a few brief seconds. "May I ask why?" I said, trying to keep my voice even. "You no longer align with the company's new direction. We don't need slow, outdated people." He didn't even look up, just kept flipping through a stack of papers like he was picking out lunch options. I wanted to scream. I wanted to point straight at him and list every sacrifice I had made over the past 11 years. I had built the entire client strategy department from scratch, led hundreds of negotiations, poured the best years of my life into this company, even after my divorce, even through sleepless nights driven by deadlines. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply smiled, a polite, cold smile. "I understand. Have a nice day, Logan." I turned and walked out, head held high. But my hand trembled as I gripped the door handle. I saw my coworkers looking at me, confused, worried. A few of them stood up, ready to ask what happened. I gave them a slight shake of the head. "Don't make this worse." I packed up my desk in silence. No one said a word. The room was so still, you could probably hear a pin drop. Driving home, I turned on the radio, but didn't hear a thing. Memories of the years gone by came crashing back like a storm. I remembered the Lunar New Year's I stayed behind to cover shifts, the late-night presentations that stretched past midnight, the day I closed our first international deal and the entire office applauded like kids. Now, all of it reduced to a cold, careless dismissal. I wasn't angry, at least not yet. What I felt most clearly was suspicion. Logan had to know I was the lead on the Vanguard deal. I was the sole signatory on every document. How could he possibly fire me right before a crucial meeting? Or had he not read any of the documents before doing this? That question followed me into the night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Everything had happened so fast. Something felt off. Not just the disrespect, but the ignorance. It was as if he was running the company like a video game. I exhaled slowly. My heart still hurt, but something else had begun to rise within me, a sense of control. He'd cast me out without a second thought. But if Logan truly had no idea about the exclusivity clause in the Vanguard contract, then the one holding the reins might actually be me. The next morning, at exactly 9:07 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I was about to let it ring out, but something in me made my hand tap, accept. Maya, it's me, Harold Pierce. My heart stopped for a beat. I just arrived at the office. Why did you leave? What happened? His voice was deep, urgent, and full of concern. Nothing like Logan's, not even close. I swallowed hard, paused a moment, then answered, Your son fired me. Yesterday. Silence. I could almost hear his teeth clenching. Today is the day the contract with Vanguard is to be signed, and you're the only one authorized to negotiate it, right? I nodded, though I knew he couldn't see. Oh, God. He exhaled sharply. The sound of papers slamming onto a desk echoed through the line. He didn't even read the contract, did he? What I felt in that moment was indescribable. A mix of relief, disbelief, even a tinge of bitter humor. I said nothing. But in my mind, one thought rang loud and clear. He just severed the very hand that held this company steady. And me. I still hold value. The phone was still warm in my hand after the call ended, but inside my head, a storm of emotions raged. Harold Pierce, the man I once respected like a second father, had just called me, sounding stunned, disappointed, and angry in a way I had never heard before. His voice didn't carry the condescension or command of Logan's. It carried something closer to pain, like someone watching the bridge they built with their own hands burn to ash, set aflame by a reckless air. I sat frozen on the sofa, a cold cup of coffee beside me, unsure whether to laugh or cry. All I knew was this. I was no longer the one cast aside. I was the linchpin, and someone had unknowingly tied the rope around their own neck. The rest of the morning, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. First it was the office landline, then HR, then accounting, finally Logan himself. But I didn't pick up. I sat there, watching my screen light up and go dark like a flickering Christmas bulb. With each ring, I felt control shift a little more in my favor. By the sixth call, my voicemail box was full. I opened just one message, from Logan. Maya, about yesterday. It was a misunderstanding. I may have reacted too quickly. We really need you back. Today. This is urgent. Urgent! That word echoed in my mind like a marble spinning in an empty glass. I leaned back, eyes closed. No apology, no admission of fault, just thinly veiled panic dressed up in polite phrasing. I opened the window. Outside, the Chicago sky was gray like a worn-out tablecloth. A cold breeze slipped in and brushed my neck, sharp but sobering. My apartment overlooked an empty parking lot, the same place I used to wait for Ubers after late shifts. I had grown used to living in the background, where no one really saw your effort until everything fell apart, and this time it did fall apart. But not for me. At 10:32 a.m., I received a call from Nicole, a former colleague from the client strategy team who had since moved to marketing. I picked up. Maya? Oh my God, you won't believe what just happened. I'm listening. Logan? Just got chewed out by his dad, in front of the entire executive board, in the main conference room. Everyone froze. I held my breath. He slammed the Vanguard contract onto the table and asked, Did you read this before firing Maya? I closed my eyes. It felt like a warm wave spreading across my chest. Nicole continued, still sounding stunned. Logan tried to deflect, mumbling something about restructuring and new direction. But Harold didn't buy it. He flipped straight to the exclusivity clause, the one you insisted on adding after the failed Atlanta deal, remember? I remember, I whispered. We all remember, except Logan. He turned ghost white, couldn't say a word. Then Harold said, If this deal falls through, your position will be reconsidered. I let out a soft laugh, not bitter, just the kind of laugh that comes from someone who's endured too much and finally sees sunlight breaking through the cracks. I don't know what you're planning to do, Maya, but this time you hold all the cards. After that call, I stood up. For the first time in 24 hours, I felt weight in my hands. Not the weight of anger, but of decision. I didn't want revenge, but I also didn't want things to go back to how they were, as if nothing had happened. I wanted a real conversation, a chance to reset boundaries, to redefine the rules. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Harold himself. "Maya, I'm truly sorry for what happened. I misjudged the situation. Please come back, not just for the deal, but so we can talk privately." I read that message 3 times. An apology, a clear acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no evasions, no excuses. I typed a short reply. "I will consider returning to complete the Vanguard deal, but under specific conditions. I'd like to speak with you in person first." I hit send, then walked into the bathroom, turned on the hot water, wiped the mirror dry, looked at myself closely. There was a new light in my eyes, not pride, but clarity. This time, I wouldn't return as someone begging for a second chance. I would return as a woman who knows her worth, and no one, not even the founder's son, would take that from me again. I wore a charcoal gray wool coat, black trousers, and had my hair neatly tied back. No makeup, no bracelets, no earrings. Just my phone in my handbag and a faint smile on my lips, just enough to command respect, but not quite enough to invite conversation. I didn't enter through the employee entrance like I usually did. I walked through the main doors, past the front desk with a camera pointed directly at the lobby. That entrance was usually reserved for VIP guests, and today, I chose to be one. "Ms. Bennett?" The receptionist shot to her feet, eyes wide. "Mr. Harold is expecting you. This way, please." The sound of my heels echoed in steady rhythm along the cold stone hallway. I could feel eyes following me from behind. A few familiar faces peeked out from meeting rooms, people I'd worked alongside through countless negotiations over the years. They didn't say anything, but in their eyes, I saw something hard to name, a blend of shock and respect. I gave a polite nod to a few, didn't stop. When I reached Harold's office, the door was already open. He stood there, no tie, his expression solemn. "Maya," he said, like a thank you without needing to say the words. I nodded and stepped inside. We didn't shake hands. The air in the room was thick, as if someone had sucked out all the oxygen. But I liked it that way. Silence holds a kind of power that words can't touch. Harold sat down first, waiting for me to take a seat. "I was wrong," he said. "No circling, no deflecting. I gave Logan too much authority without enough oversight. I thought he needed a chance to prove himself, but he started by tearing apart the very best this company had." I didn't respond right away. I just looked at him. His eyes were tired, sunken, but they didn't look away. "The issue isn't just the contract," I said slowly. "It's the way I was treated, as if I'd never existed." Harold nodded. "And that's my fault," he said. "I was fully aware of the exclusivity clause you added to the Vanguard deal. I'm the one who requested it after the fiasco with the Tokyo partnership. I just didn't think Logan wouldn't read the contract." I leaned slightly forward. "So, what is it you want from me now?" "I want you back," he said without hesitation. "Back with full control over the Vanguard deal. No interference from Logan. Whatever terms you set, I'll sign. Today." I didn't answer immediately. I looked out through the glass window. In the distance, Lake Michigan faded into a silver-gray haze. The surface looked still, but I knew, beneath that calm were currents no one could see. "I'll return," I said, "but everything must be in writing. A new contract, with clear terms. I have full authority over Vanguard from start to finish, and Logan is not to attend any meetings." Harold nodded, as if he'd been expecting it. "I'll have legal drafted immediately." I stood up. "And one more thing," I said as I walked to the door. "This can't happen again, not just to me, but to anyone." He remained still, eyes on me for a long moment. "You have my word." I left Harold's office. And in the hallway, I saw Logan, standing at the end of the corridor, arms crossed, pretending to chat with a junior staffer. But when he saw me, something shifted in his eyes. I didn't stop, didn't nod, didn't look long. I just walked past him, as if he were a stranger. And in that moment, I saw it. That split second when he realized he was losing power. Power he thought came from his CEO title, but that actually lived in the things he could never control: respect, credibility, and the silence of someone who had once been underestimated. 12:05 p.m. I returned to the company, no announcement, no warm welcome, no flowers, no applause. But with every step I took across the polished stone floor, something felt different. The air wasn't filled with pity for someone recently fired. It was laced with cautious silence, as if everyone was waiting to see what I'd do next. I brought only 2 things: the contract Harold had signed that morning and the project brief for the Vanguard deal, the one Logan had so recklessly tossed aside. The receptionist looked at me. This time, there was no awkward hesitation. Mr. Harold instructed, "You may head straight up." I nodded. The elevator doors opened, and my reflection appeared clearly in the stainless steel wall. In that brief silence, I saw myself, steady, composed, and no longer driven by emotion. I wasn't coming back to seek justice. I was coming back to reassert a truth. Value can't be fired. The doors slid open. I stepped out. The 12th floor hallway was as familiar as ever, but the looks I received had changed. I walked past the main conference room, the place where I had once presented countless major strategies. Inside, the Vanguard negotiation team had already arrived, punctual as always. They sat upright, their expressions serious. At the head of the table was their chairman, Mr. Samir, a Lebanese gentleman I had once dined with at the Peninsula Hotel 5 months ago. He was reviewing the contract, translated into Arabic. I entered and smiled. "Assalamu alaikum, Mr. Samir," I said in fluent Arabic. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face before his eyes lit up. "You remembered I like being greeted in my native language." "I don't forget what matters," I replied, locking eyes with him. The entire Vanguard team smiled. They saw something Logan never did. Small details are the language of respect. The meeting began. Logan stood outside the glass-paneled room, an outsider now. He hadn't been invited in, and per the terms of my new contract, he had no right to speak. I could feel his gaze on me from a distance, but I never looked back. Within 90 minutes, the deal was sealed. Every clause was reviewed meticulously. I presented a 3-phase rollout strategy for the East Coast market, emphasizing cash flow agility and optimization of the distribution network. Mr. Samir nodded often, and his assistant took notes almost non-stop. Finally, he extended his hand. "I trust you, Maya, not because of the contract, but because of the way you returned." I shook his hand, firm but graceful. "Thank you, and I believe this is only the beginning." After the Vanguard team left, Harold walked into the room. His face no longer held the exhaustion of the day before. It looked relieved. "You just saved the company from a complete disaster." I shook my head gently. "I simply did the same job I've done for the past 11 years. The only difference is, this time, someone noticed." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with unspoken thoughts, but I didn't wait for him to say them. I closed the file, stood up. "I've returned, but not as before. From now on, I want to reshape how this company values performance, not by name, not by bloodline, but by actual contribution." Harold nodded. "And I'll support you, fully." I turned and walked out. Once again, I passed Logan. This time, he wasn't pretending to talk to anyone. He just stood there, watching. No arrogance, no defiance. Just the look of someone who, for the first time, realized power doesn't come from a title. It comes from trust. And that's something he never had. The public slap in the conference room might have seemed like the end of it. But I soon realized, with people like Logan Pierce, failure isn't the conclusion. It's the beginning of something more covert, more insidious, and far dirtier. Just a few days after the Vanguard deal hit the industry headlines, glowing with the title, Pierce and Stone seals historic partnership with Vanguard developers through strategic agility and bold leadership, I started noticing subtle disruptions. It began with a reimbursement for travel expenses that hadn't gone through. A simple administrative error, I thought. I followed up. Accounting said my paperwork was incomplete, but I had submitted everything, signed and confirmed. I sent it again. This time, no one responded. Then came the documents I submitted for approval, files that usually cleared within a day, being returned. No comments, no explanations. And then, one Thursday morning, I received an email from a partner in Dubai. Hi, Maya. We received an update about the profit-sharing ratio for the Western Region project, sent from your email address, but the numbers seem off. Could you please confirm? I opened the forwarded message, my eyes locked on the sender's address. It was my company email, my name, my digital signature. But the content wasn't mine, and the figures were blatantly, egregiously wrong. I felt a chill down my spine. Instinct told me this was an attack. Not a direct one, no more firings. This was character sabotage, painting me as careless, untrustworthy. I reported it to IT. They ran a trace. No signs of external breach, but the email had been sent from a shared workstation on the 10th floor near the break room. Someone had logged in using my credentials, or had access to my password. I began keeping detailed records, dates, times, emails, names. I didn't react emotionally. I used reason, experience, and black and white documentation. In the late afternoons, after work hours, I sat alone in an empty meeting room, staring out the glass wall. Lights from the neighboring towers slowly flickered on, each window like an eye watching me, and I no longer knew who was ally, who was trap. One evening, as I was packing up to leave the office, I heard voices coming from the conference room across the hall. The door was slightly ajar. She's unstable. Ever since she came back, she's been erratic, aggressive, emotionally unbalanced. It was Logan. I stood frozen outside the door. I just think, maybe it's time to consider alternatives for the head of strategic client relations, he continued. Another voice responded. I couldn't place it. Possibly a new executive. But she just saved us from a major fallout. Logan scoffed. She got lucky, but we can't run this company on luck. I walked away quietly. No confrontation, no outburst, because I knew I didn't have to say anything. It was all being recorded, in his own voice. That night, I called internal affairs. I explained everything, not with the voice of a whistleblower, but with the calm, deliberate tone of someone who had evidence. A few days later, I was summoned to a temporary room, once a storage closet, now the war room for the internal audit team. White walls, a timeline board, monitors blinking with data. David, the head of the investigation team, began with a nod. We've verified your suspicions. That falsified email was sent from the 10th floor workstation using your login. Has anyone else experienced similar incidents? I asked, my voice quiet. Yes, and we're identifying a common pattern. Troublingly, most of them are directly or indirectly connected to Logan Pierce. I sat still. Mr. Harold has requested we report to him directly, no intermediate channels. I nodded. I'd like to be present during the final briefing. David looked surprised. You're not required to attend. This is an internal matter. I looked him in the eye, my voice steady. Then this time, Internal Affairs needs to look me in the eye while hearing the truth. That morning, I arrived early. Before the hallway lights turned on, before the front desk was staffed. I sat alone in a small conference room on the 14th floor, the one usually reserved for confidential reviews. Frosted glass doors, a whiteboard covered in names, dates, and times, a cup of black coffee beside a thick folder, the evidence the internal audit team had spent the past 2 weeks compiling. I reread every line, not to investigate, but to remain calm. Some former colleagues, people who had quietly left the company, appeared in the extracted data logs. Suppressed complaints, edited emails, internal reports that never reached Harold's desk, and I began to wonder how many of them had been pushed out, quietly, like I almost was. 9:05 a.m. Harold entered. In his hand was a thinner folder than mine, but I knew each page in it could shift the power structure of the company. "Are you sure you want to be here?" he asked. I nodded. "I don't just want to speak. I want them to see me." 9:10 a.m. David and 2 internal investigators walked in. The projector flicked on. The report opened. 9:13 a.m. The final door opened. Logan stepped inside. White dress shirt, gray suit, the same confident gaze, as if nothing had ever touched him. In his hand, the familiar iPad, like a false shield for the crumbling power he clung to. But when his eyes met mine, sitting at the center of the table, directly across, his brows twitched. "She's not part of the internal investigation team," Logan said instantly, like a reflex. Harold didn't even turn his head. His voice was calm. "She's here, at my request." No one said anything more. Logan gripped the strap of his bag and sat down. I looked him straight in the eyes. No hatred, no anger, just a silent presence. One that made it impossible for him to pretend anymore. David began the presentation. Timelines lit up on the screen. Dates, times, devices used, login credentials, copies of emails, before and after being altered. HR report excerpts showing recurring patterns. Productive employees suddenly downgraded, removed from key roles, and quietly pushed out. With every passing minute, the room grew colder. Logan tried to hold his composure. "You're making assumptions. This is circumstantial. I cut in. Not loudly, but with precision. "I was impersonated via email. My documents were altered. I was removed from a major project through a power play. This isn't speculation. I have proof." Harold stood, his gaze fixed on Logan, voice lowered. "I gave you chances. More than one. But you didn't change. You just got more subtle." Logan shot up. "You're choosing an outsider over your own son?" Harold didn't flinch. He simply placed both hands on the table, his voice steady. "I'm not choosing an outsider. I'm choosing the one who deserves it." No one spoke. The room sank into a heavy, suffocating silence, as if any movement might shatter the truth into 1,000 shards. Finally, Harold exhaled, like releasing a knot that had been lodged in his throat for far too long. "The board will review the full report, but as of now, Logan, you are suspended indefinitely. All executive authority is revoked until a final decision is made." Logan stood frozen. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes darted around the room, searching for something, someone to cling to. But no one spoke, not a single sympathetic glance, not a word to save him. He turned to me, and for the first time, there was no fury in his eyes, only shock, confusion, a quiet question of how it all came to this. I said nothing. I didn't need to. I simply looked at him. So he would understand. It wasn't me who won. It was the truth. 2 weeks after that meeting, no one spoke Logan's name aloud anymore, but he was still there, like a shadow, silent, lingering in the avoided glances of hallway conversations, in the hushed rumors whispered in the break room, in the hesitant eyes of those who once raised their glasses beside him at executive banquets. I didn't hear anyone say the word termination, but I knew everyone was counting down. The final report from the internal investigation was delivered directly to the board of directors. I didn't read it. I didn't need to. I had lived it. I was at the center of it. Every forged email, every recorded smear, every manipulated data set, it wasn't just information anymore. It was a scar engraved on the skin of those who had silently endured. Harold summoned me to his office. The door was shut, as usual. But today, it didn't feel like the seat of power. It felt more like a confessional. He sat behind his desk, hands resting on a thick folder. He didn't open it. He just let it sit there. "You know, don't you?" he said after a few moments of silence. That the board has voted? I asked. He nodded. They don't want to make a scene. No press, no lawsuits, no scandal for the family. Just a quiet withdrawal. I said nothing. I had already predicted this outcome. Logan wouldn't be dragged into the light. People like him always find ways to rebrand failure as a sabbatical, a personal project, a period of realignment. "You're not dissatisfied with that?" he asked, his eyes subdued. I shook my head. No. Because I didn't need him to fall. I just needed people to see. Harold leaned forward on the desk, his shoulders heavy. In that moment, he didn't look like a CEO, or even a father. He looked like a man who had gone too far in silence and was finally forced to hear the echo of his own mistakes. "I failed to raise him," he said quietly. "I thought giving him power would make him grow, but all I did was hand him a weapon." I stayed silent. "So what do you plan to do now?" I asked. Harold pushed the folder toward me. "Start again, with someone who deserves it." I opened it. The first line, printed in bold, appointment, Maya Bennett, Executive Director of Strategic Client Relations, reporting directly to the CEO. I looked up. He met my gaze without blinking. "I didn't nominate you. The board did. They said, 'This woman walked through hell and still stood tall. If she's still here, then she should lead.'" I smiled slightly. "So now I get to ask for not just the seat, but the map as well? If you want to rebuild, I'll let you do it your way," he replied. "But only on one condition." I tilted my head. "Don't become the person you just defeated." I closed the folder, then stood. "I won't become another version of Logan, but I'll be something he never understood. A leader who doesn't need power to be heard." Harold smiled. It wasn't the smile of a boss. It was the smile of a tired man exhaling after a long winter of silence. I left the office, and for the first time since I walked into this company 11 years ago, I wasn't walking to protect my position. I was walking to redefine a culture far too used to keeping its head down. The door to my new office still didn't have a nameplate. Just a frosted glass panel, a smooth walnut desk, an empty bookshelf, and a large window facing east across the city. The very room I once only dared to dream of sitting behind. Now I stood in the center of it. Quiet. No welcome committee, no applause. I didn't need it anymore. I set my bag on the desk, powered on the computer, and stood by the window, looking out at the city. A light mist blurred the skyline, nothing remarkable. But inside me, everything had changed. Not because I had a new title, but because for the first time in years I was doing the right work the right way, without hiding, without softening my tone, without rewriting emails 3 times just to avoid being called too sensitive. On my first day as Director of Strategic Client Relations, I didn't call a press conference. I didn't send out a grand announcement. I did just one thing. I invited each key team member in client strategy to a one-on-one conversation. I asked them 3 questions. What's something that has made you feel stifled working here? Who has truly seen your efforts? And who hasn't? If you could change one thing about this workplace, what would it be? Some were hesitant. Some blinked in surprise. They'd never been asked that before. But they all answered, and I took notes. Not for reporting, but to listen. In my first week, I reinstated projects that had been shelved for being inefficient, but only because they were led by people Logan disliked. I reached out to a few former employees who had left quietly. Some replied, some didn't, but all wrote back the same thing. "Thank you for not staying silent." I implemented an anonymous reporting system, not just for whistleblowing, but for suggesting improvements. And I handwrote letters to every employee affected by the internal fallout. Not templates, not legal jargon, but in my own voice. On the first evening I left the office, I passed the main conference room, the one where the Vanguard deal had unfolded. The lights were off, the table cleared, but I paused. I remembered the moment I walked in, greeted Mr. Samir in Arabic, and saw his eyes light up at that small gesture. I remembered being called too tough, difficult to approach. Successful women tend to be lonely. And all the times I smiled through it, then worked even harder. But not because I needed to prove anything, because I was afraid that if I didn't outdo everyone, no one would remember me at all. Now, I'm different. I don't need to be remembered for how much I endured. I want people, no matter which floor they work on, to know they can speak up, they can fail, and they can come back without being labeled weak. I want to redefine value, not by KPIs, not by overtime hours, but by how we treat each other after a mistake. Not long after, an intern on my team, her name was Rosa, sent me a short email. "Ms. Maya, thank you for asking my opinion in this morning's meeting. It was the first time I felt like a boss asked because they really wanted to know. I've learned that to make an impact, you don't need to speak loudly. You just need to be willing to listen deeply." I read it again, and again. Then I smiled. Not big, but real. Logan? I heard he moved to a tech startup in a small southern city. No scandal, no headlines, no revisiting the past. Some say Harold paved the way for his quiet exit, one last act of fatherly protection. I didn't speak on it. I didn't need to know more, because I've learned something far more valuable than winning or losing. True value doesn't need to be fought for. It stays, as long as you don't lose yourself trying to keep it.